Welcome, everybody, to the show. I'm very thrilled to introduce a wonderful panel of guests. I'm very lucky to speak with such illustrious scholars and learned people to talk about my favorite topic, which is Partimento. I think it's one of the most amazing discoveries in music education. And I just would like to introduce the guest panel today. Well, first of all, hello everyone. We're all in different time zones, so just hello to everybody.
Hello.
So maybe we could actually just go around the panel and everybody introduce themselves briefly, and maybe Professor Gjerdingen, Bob, why didn't you start first and just introduce yourself?
All right. I'm Bob Gjerdingen. I was a professor for many years at Northwestern University near Chicago. I'm in the attic of my house in South Dakota, which is far below zero today, and 50 kilometer per hour winds. And you would only last about 5 minutes outside before you were frozen to death. But anyway, I'm still very glad to be here, and I can only dream of Bella Italia.
Yes.
Wonderful. And just so people know, a map of Minnesota, let me just bring up a map here. So let's see this here. This is Minnesota, and it's very north.
And South Dakota is to the left of that.
So you're in South Dakota. Okay, I see. So, okay,
Yeah,
wonderful.
if you ever saw the movie Dancing with Wolves, that's where I am.
Wonderful. Okay, Professor Sanguinetti, why did you introduce yourself?
Oh, well, my name is Giorgio Sanguinetti. I'm still a professor at University of Rome Tor Vergata, and I think I'm going to retire next fall, November. Yeah, because I'm old, Yeah.
Wow.
And yes, I live in Rome, and weather is not so bad as in North Dakota or South Dakota. We are not freezing, but nevertheless, there's some quite cold, according to Roman standards, and so we're not exactly freezing, but the weather is not so good today. Anyway, and I'm just very happy to be here and be talking with my colleagues and friends about one of my favorite topics. It is Partimento, of course.
Wonderful. All right, Professor Peter Ventura, why don't you go ahead and give a short introduction?
Yeah, my name is Peter Ventura. I am usually living on the island of Gotland, which is in the Baltic Sea between Sweden and the Baltic states. At the moment, I am in Örebro, where I have a new position at the University of Örebro, and I've been living for 2 years. That's Gotland, yes, exactly, in the middle of nowhere.
In the middle of the Baltic Sea, which is nowhere.
Well, let's for our final guest, the lovely Rosa Cafiero. What a great scholar! Please introduce yourself and tell us about your background.
Thank you so much, Nikhil. I'm so happy to be here with you all. Well, I was born in Naples, which means I've been starting to study composition when I was about 20 at the Conservatorio San Pietro Maiella, where I was learning piano and percussion and other things. Then I took a degree at the University of Naples, which is Federico II. Since 1993, which is quite a deal of time, almost 30 years, I'm a researcher with tenure track at the Catholic University in Milan. At present, I'm in my home. This is my study. It's quite a mess, as you can see, in Bologna, where I live since 20 years, since 2002.
Oh, very
That's
nice.
it. And 1993 is the year when I published my first La Didattica del Partimento. And so I'm so proud and so happy of that. And I'm still on the road.
1993, incredible! Wow. I mean, I feel like
Yeah.
I just walked in the door at 2019. So 1993, I mean, fantastic. You must have some stories to share. And I actually want to begin on that topic, which is Partimento research. We talked a little bit about that, Professor Sanguinetti and Professor Gjerdingen, in in our first panel interview, you talked a little bit about, I think, was it Gustav Fellerer? I think I can't remember the scholar, but let's go
Yes,
to
it's
the 80s. Let's go to the 80s, the 90s. What was everyone doing in those 80s? And actually, maybe I should ask the question: when did you discover Partimento? And let's talk about those early days. Maybe Professor Gjerdingen, you want to start it off?
Well, my Italian colleagues had been working on this for a long time, uh, since the 15th century. So I came along very late. I had been studying the typical phrases of 18th century music. So um, things today that a Partimento scholar might call bass motions, moti del basso, and things like that. But I had been studying them from the repertory. I didn't know anything about Partimenti. I thought I knew everything there was to know about music theory, and I was quite wrong. And Jesse Rosenberg, a colleague of mine, uh, we were talking about some technical issue of music theory. This is in about 2008, maybe. I'm not sure. But he said, "Well, they talked about that, in these Partimento treatises." And I said, "What's that?" I'd actually never heard the word. In fact, the American Music Dictionary, the Harvard Dictionary of Music, which was a very well-known dictionary, very authoritative, there is no entry for the word Partimento.
Wow.
It didn't exist in America. And so he said, yes, I have a copy here. I have Paisiello's Partimenti. And he showed me a bass, and I immediately recognized the patterns because it starts with what I call a Romanesca-like bass, dum, bum, 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 like that. And then it went into what I call a printer riposte. And I was just like this, I thought they were teaching this stuff. This is amazing. I have to know more about this. And so then I got a grant and I ran off to Italy. And I mean, Rosa and Giorgio, they couldn't have been more friendly and welcoming. But really, I was like some crazy American salesman who goes over to Europe and says, I can sell wine in America, just tell me all about it. And so they helped to teach me, and eventually I learned a little bit about what was going on. But it was helpful to come from a different perspective, the perspective of the style of 18th century music, and then to learn that things that I thought were important were being taught in the conservatory. So that was my connection.
Wonderful. Professor Sanguinetti, how about you?
Well, at the time, I was a card-carrying Shakarian, and so my background in music theory was completely different, but perhaps not so different for certain things. And but I was also interested in the history of music theory, so I published a bibliography on Italian music theory from 1850 to 1950. And after publishing this, I have already started teaching at university, and I have a student. And so I thought, well, for your dissertation, you might maybe do the same thing I did, like a bibliography, but starting from 1750 and moving to 1850. And she began doing her research, and after a while, she called me and said, there is nothing. What do you mean there is nothing? There must be something. No, there's nothing. Professor, believe me, there's nothing. I couldn't believe that. And so I questioned her, and she was right. There was not exactly nothing, but very little. And what was is those crazy exercises written on just one staff, and Bassetti and Partimenti and Bassi and Regole. And so I realized that the teaching of music theory in Italy was not through treatises and heavy books and 3 volumes, Musiktheorie, Lehre der Musiktheorie, like in Germany. But it was through this manuscript and word out exercises, and that they could be found in countless copy throughout all Italy in libraries. And then I remembered that my friend Rosa Cafiero, we knew each other very well because we were colleagues years before. And I remember that she published this paper on a miscellaneous book, on a collection of papers called entitled the Regole of Cotomacci, Fortuna sulle regole di Carlo Cotomacci. And was also another input. My friend and senior colleague Agostino Zino, when I started teaching music theory at the university, he told me, "Why don't you teach Fenaroli?" And I was stunned because for my generation and perhaps for the previous generation, Fenaroli was something awfully old-fashioned, completely, the old stuff, totally useless. So I took this as a joke of Agostino, from Agostino's part, but this was not a joke. He was serious. And I started looking at Fenaroli, and, it started this way. It started exactly this way.
That's interesting. I mean, if I could just jump in, I mean, Fenaroli was considered useless. I mean, old or just old-fashioned.
Yes, because Fenaroli had been taught in Italy until 1950, 1960. There were still some of my teachers who studied Fenaroli, but it was considered something not scientific. So the real scientific harmony was the German one. And everybody who trained on Fenaroli was considered completely old-fashioned. And but yes, they were still used.
Very interesting.
There was no interruption at all.
Oh, we'll circle back to that. But let's jump to Professor Van Toor. Why don't you talk about when you discovered Partimento?
Yeah, well, it was, I think, in 2008 or something like that. I was asked to do a little investigation for the Stockholm College of Music to write something about the history of Swedish music theory. So I went through some archival materials, what they did in the early 19th century, and I bumped onto this book by which they bought in Stockholm, I think maybe 1815, something like that, by Nicola Sala. And it was called Regole del Contrappunto. And I thought I knew quite a lot of books on counterpoint, but I'd never heard about this counterpoint book. So I just took the phone and telephoned to the librarian and asked, I see something here. There should be a book by Nicola Sala, which the library bought in 1815. Do you think is it possible that it's still there? So just a moment, and she went to the library and she went looking for it, and then she said, "Oh wow, this is quite something. It is in 3 volumes. It's in a
Yes.
large folio, and it's printed by the King of Naples." And I thought, I was even more astonished that I hadn't heard about this book, since it was such a huge volume. And I mean, I've never seen it in any register or bibliography. So next time I went to Stockholm, I thought I have to go there and look what it is. And I saw some. I started to Google on the internet and found some pages of Sala Partimenti. And that was the moment when I thought, this is amazing stuff. So I remember the page I looked at on the internet was like a the Partimento fugue, and you could see from the picture that this was a very competent teacher, because he knew exactly how to combine the theme and the counter subject through the figures. I could see that from the page. So, and I think I took contact with you, Bob, at that moment, and you sent me a bunch of Sala Partimenti, one of the manuscripts, which you photocopied. That was very kind, and it was the start for me to start transcribing the stuff. And maybe 7, 8 years later, I published the Sala Partimento edition, but it took a lot of time.
There's the dedication to Ferdinando IV. Very, very interesting. Professor Rosa,
Oh my God.
clearly your
In cauda
research
venenum, say the Latin.
your research has been very influential. So why don't you talk about how you discovered it and how you got into this research?
Sure. I've always been wondering why am I being taught harmony in a specific way. I mean, in my early 20s, I was studying counterpoint and harmony in a certain way, and I was just wondering, why is it so? Because all my friends who had been learning in Bologna or in Milan would follow completely different, let's say, Weltanschauungen, points of views. So I just decided to go into the library. I was a student, I was a pupil at the conservatorio, and I started going to the library and looking for materials. Then I started looking for a person, Giuseppe Sigismondo, who was authoring this Apoteosi della Musica, Apotheosis of Music, which was eventually published in 2016 and 17. There's an English edition published in 2017, and I found lots of archival documents. And at the beginning of the 1810, 1812, this man, who was the librarian of the Collegio di Musica, was asked to decide what kind of old scores should be kept to go on with the tradition. And he talked about Leo, Durante, and Cotumacci. And so I was wondering, who is Cotumacci indeed? And I started looking for these things. Then in 1987, it was exactly when I met Giorgio for the first time, because we were teaching at the same conservatorio in Reggio Calabria, in the south, the southernest Italy.
Southern tip
He
of
was
Italy.
teaching yeah, exactly. He was teaching piano. By then, I was teaching my first year as history of music teacher. And so at the same time, I had a tenure track at the University of Pavia, Cremona, Filologia Musicale, and so on. And I had to have a course on esegesi delle fonti musicali, music sources interpretation. And I decided to use these partimenti of Cotumacci in order to teach harmony to these university students, and in order to realize myself, and realize in the sense of making, of course, harmonic realizations. And that's how it started, because the paper was published in 1993 together with other papers of teachers at this university. I was just being together with Angela Romagnoli, who was a scholar. She was just finishing her PhD, and with Maria Caracci Vela. And moreover, Agostino Zino is my tutor. I mean, when I took my degree in Naples in 1986 at the University Federico II, the same Agostino Zino, about whom Giorgio was talking, was my thesis tutor. So that's it. I started just because I wanted to understand why am I learning music in this way, and then it started, and I still don't know why. Actually, I can confess I haven't found an answer.
I was just looking in my library for the book where you published the first Partimento paper. And do you have a copy to you, so you can
Yeah.
show?
Well, if you wait just a moment, I will have to look for it. Yeah. Yes, I have it. Not in this room.
Okay. I want also to point out that Rosa is the only Neapolitan among us. Because neither of us is Neapolitan, but she is. Is the only one.
So interesting that that this lineage continues into you, Rosa.
Yes.
Now,
More than a burden. We say, there's a Neapolitan expression, we say onore e piacere, honor and pleasure, which means I both have the honor and the pleasure and the burden. I'm joking, of course. No burden, nothing at all. If you just concede me a couple of minutes, I can take this volume and I will just show you in a
okay.
couple of minutes.
I mean,
If you know
this is
where
not.
it is.
Yeah, this
Yes.
is
Don't say
not.
too many things at my back because I can't
Yeah.
hear you.
Okay, well, maybe while Rosa is looking for that document, let's go over to the next topic, which was the difficulties, and I'm sure there have been difficulties in the research, because it's very nice now. You know, we have websites, we have partimenti.org, we have books, Art of Partimento, Counterpoint and Part. Very nice. People can just go and buy a book. It's so convenient, but it wasn't always convenient, was it?
Oh, no. Not at all.
Let me give some background. In the United States, we pretend that we have no class system, okay? But when you look at European history, it's very clear that there were definite classes. And I'll just say that there were people closer to the top of the system and there were people closer to the bottom. And to understand the blank spot in academic music that should have been held by Partimento, you have to understand the class system. That musicians, working professional musicians, were closer to the bottom of the system, and that the people who attended the university were closer to the top. Now, occasionally there could be some crossover. There were always aristocrats who wanted to dabble in music, and there were always musicians who became very famous. But even today, I've joked that if you're a famous rock musician, that a prince of Abu Dhabi wants you to play for his daughter's wedding. He wants you at his daughter's wedding, but he doesn't want you there as the groom.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's true.
So I mean, the wealthy people of the world try not to marry rock stars, but they want them around them. So that's a huge difference. And the people in the university got to write the histories of the arts, but those weren't the people who were professionals in the arts. So, in a university, you take a course on space travel, but at the end of 14 weeks, they don't put you on a rocket. You don't know anything about what you would need to ride a rocket into space, but you have got an A in the course. That's what we have today. To get an A in harmony at 19 years old in 14 weeks, you have to be given a game that you can play and win. And that game has very little to do with music.
Well, Professor Gjerdingen, are you saying that it's a glorified music appreciation course then? What the university says?
Absolutely. The modern harmony course is an invention of the German university. I mean, it's amazing that like a person like Richter, who wrote harmony books in the middle of the 19th century, he was a student of Mate, which is to say a student of a student of a student of Padre Martini. So he knew what professional musicians knew, but you can't teach that in 14 weeks to the son of a German baron who
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I don't want to interrupt you.
Yeah. So you need to come up with a game that looks like music, but that can be won by somebody who doesn't know anything about music. And you can't ask the son of a German baron to spend 10 years as a slave in a conservatory to become a musician. So there's a social need for a class that clueless people can take and pass that has to do with music. And that's the modern harmony course. And because artisans didn't get to write their own histories, Partimento was nowhere in music history. Now, great practical musicians did learn Partimenti. I mean, Luciano Berio, who is this king of contemporary, 20th century Italian music, was given all 6 books of Fenaroli by his grandfather when he was 8 years old. And so he knew this tradition, but not in the universities. So that's the backdrop. And so in a way, I think it was only in the 21st century, in the late 20th century, when jazz and popular music became acceptable in the university, that people could imagine improvisation as being something of interest and not just something that lower class musicians did.
Oh, okay. So
And
that's one important question. So why did this is a big topic, but why did improvisation die in the 19th century, so to speak?
Yes.
Giorgio?
Yes, I wanted to continue for a little bit what Bob was saying about the rise of scientific harmony. It happened, I think, indeed in Germany, and in Germany there were at least 2 important centers. One was Berlin, and the other one was Leipzig. So in Berlin, I think the German Harmonielehre developed together with the Formenlehre, and one of the most important persons was Adolf Bernhard Marx. Now, can you imagine? Adolf Bernhard Marx was hired by the Humboldt University to teach music theory, music composition in a university for the first time. Actually, Humboldt asked Mendelssohn, but he refused, and he suggested Marx instead. So what was Marx's problem? Was that the students who came into his class were just coming out the class of Hegel on the other side of the aisle. So your neighbor was Hegel. Can you imagine that? So how can you teach something that is at the same level of sophistication, of intellectual sophistication of Hegel's lectures? And obviously, you cannot teach Partimento or solo bass as it was used to do. You had to teach something very much more sophisticated and top of the class, intellectual. So and in Leipzig, well, what happened in Leipzig is something that connects with your question, Nikhil. So the disappearance of improvisation. The Leipzig Conservatory was the first conservatory in Germany. In Berlin, there was no conservatory at the time, but the Leipzig was the first. I think it was founded in 1843, something like that. I'm not sure, by Mendelssohn, by the way. And the Leipzig Conservatory was the first place where they started dividing the skills of musicians. So if you are a pianist, you are not supposed to learn composition. If you are a composer, you are not supposed to learn how to play an instrument because they are different professions. And even for pianists, they cut the piano performance in 2 parts. One was called a 4-track, and this is what we call interpretation. And one was called technique, and it is obviously technique. So there were 2 different teachers. One for technique, only exercises, only fingers, and one for 4-track. So the Leipzig was hugely influential, also because Leipzig was the most important center for music publishing in the world. There was a huge concentration of music publishers, Breitkopf, Peters, you name it. They were all there in Leipzig. So you put together the conservatory and the music publishers, and they had a huge impact on on the way music is taught, it was being taught and understood. So, of course, in this project, uh, there was no place for improvisation. So it fell out completely.
I have a follow-up question to that. And now the Partimento tradition is so immensely practical, and it almost seems like every activity in the curriculum for those 10 years had a purpose. There was nothing wasted almost in that time. But this begs the question, why improvise? What's the point of improvisation? Does anybody want to answer that question? Why should musicians improvise? Historically, was there any purpose to just making up music on the spot? Why not just make masterpieces, work really hard on them, publish them, and just leave them?
Well,
I think it is basically a kind of a survival strategy for composers. Because if you were a composer in the 18th century, you had to be quick. You had to write an opera. You had a certain number of weeks at your disposal to have the score ready, but also the parts. And you had to rehearse the piece. There are certain years I've seen. I think Domenico Cimarosa had one year when he wrote like 10 or 12 operas or something like that. Can you imagine? Every opera, like 2 or 3 volumes for each act, one volume. So it's like a whole shelf of scores just in one year. Yeah. So improvisation was the mean to be able to do that, because you had to have an enormous fluency in creating music. Of course, this was not only a Neapolitan thing, because this was a general thing in all over Europe in the 18th century. But I think the Neapolitans had the ability to create a pedagogy which was really they had an institutionalized situation where they could develop these methods, and they had the best teachers in Italy at their disposal. So it's not a big surprise that they become very, very good in this.
yeah. If I could just add in 2 things. The first is that notated music is the rare exception in the history of all the world's music.
Yeah.
There were no scores for the Beatles or the Rolling Stones, or most popular music with small groups is not notated. And most of the world's musicians don't read music when they play. The other thing is that the Beatles would be a good example. It's a very small ensemble, and a small ensemble allows for a certain latitude. So when you're a soloist playing in a church at the organ, you really can do whatever you want. And if you're in a small ensemble, if you cooperate, you can improvise. But the 19th century saw the rise of gigantic musical ensembles. The conductor is really a 19th century invention.
Mhm.
All of that precision and scale tends to squeeze out individual options. And so, by the end of the 19th century, a musician in an orchestra is almost like a machine that has a very specific part. Even today, like movie music, if it's a large orchestra, you don't improvise around your score, you just play your score. So there are some historical trends that led to it.
Well,
But there's more improvisation in the 19th century than most people today realize. Well until the middle of the century, most pianists improvised at the end of their concerts.
mm, mm.
And at the
Elab-
start of the concert, also,
Yes.
yeah,
just a few, a very superficial research on YouTube will show you that um, Dino Lipatti, for example, and other great pianists like Bachhaus, for example. The last concert of Wilhelm Bachhaus at the Conservatory well, after the last concert he gave in 1969, he was very ill at the moment, and he had to play in the second half of the recital 3 Beethoven piano sonata. I think it was Opus 31, number 1, and don't remember. But he was not feeling very well, so he decided to play something easier for him to play, which was, by the way, very difficult indeed, Schumann Opus 12. And there's a recording, a live recording of this performance. And in the beginning, the first movement of Schumann Opus 12 is in D flat major, and it starts preludizing and improvising a short prelude ending on the dominant on D flat major. And then it begins with, da, 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 And at the same time, did Lipati. In the last concert, there's still a recording of Dino Lipati last concert, which was very ill at the time, and he did exactly the same thing. Before beginning the repertoire piece, he improvised the short prelude very beautifully. So there was something that pianists trained in the end of the 19th century, they could do this.
And Rosa, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, but just very shortly. As a matter of fact, I understand that when for instance, the Leipzig Conservatory was instituted at the beginning of the 40s in the 19th century, of course, the Naples tradition was just fading down. There were, the way music was produced and thought was quite different. So Italy was a backwater by then. The question is that Naples had been starting at the end of the 16th century and has been working along with all these things. Improvising was absolutely necessary when you had to be a church musician, when you had to play on the organ. So you had to have so many different skills, and you really have to exercise. Even Beethoven would just have a theme and go on improvising when he was rehearsing at the beginning of his career. I mean, it's quite really obvious. The way the Neapolitans did it was maybe just tied to this tradition and to the fact that they had to be always on stage in several occasions. Even the pupils were absolutely obliged to work as singers, as instrumentalists, as keyboard players. So it was a skill they had to perform, they had to fix.
I want to share a clip now. I've never done a clip on the show, but I'd like to try. Now, Professor Sanguinetti, in your 18th century article, you talked about this. You talked about, I want to try and play it and see if people can understand. Let me see if you can hear it, but let's just see what this is here.
Sempre caro e fu quest'eramo colle, ok. Mi fu quest'eramo colle e questa siete l'ultimo orizzonte questa siete.
Now, that's Dustin Hoffman memorizing a speech in
It's a poem. It's actually a poem by Leopardi.
Now, what is the parallel with that and the way we learn music today?
That Hoffman couldn't understand a single word of what he was saying.
He should have asked an Italian to give it some tips on pronunciations, maybe. I don't know.
And so you're saying, so this is someone who's memorizing something, trying his best, maybe with a coach to get all the inflections and all of that, but he's not quite learning the language.
No, he doesn't. I think that Hoffman did understand what he was saying, because maybe he read the English translation of L'Infinito. But the meaning of the whole, he couldn't understand what he was saying, really. He couldn't use the word of L'Infinito to say something personal. This is the problem.
The way he speaks is mechanical. There's no soul.
We memorize music as Beethoven sonata, a Bach prelude, but we cannot use the syntactical units we play in Beethoven and in Bach to form or sentences. That's the point. And this is, I think, the point of Bob's work. So the idea that we should learn syntactical units and meaningful units, not just chords or notes, because chords are not significant in themselves. And obviously notes are not. We have to learn something more complete to put together and to create sentences, meaningful sentences.
Now, when I was in college, now granted, I went to a contemporary music college, everyone hated studying counterpoint. Counterpoint was the worst thing you could have imagined studying. And everybody said, okay, maybe harmony, I get to learn chords. But counterpoint is, it's so boring. It's awful. What am I going to do with this? Now, one thing I found interesting about Partimento is almost a rehabilitation of counterpoint. Maybe can we talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think the opposite. If you want to learn counterpoint, you just have to learn the intervals. If you want to do harmony exercises, you have to learn a lot of things beforehand.
Anybody want to jump in on that?
I always told my students that harmony is a fairy tale told about counterpoint.
Well, actually, counterpoint is fun. It's really fun because the way Partimento was played was an intertwined thing of what we call harmony, has seen from the 20th century, 21st century perspective. And of course, this combination, because they really had to sing all along. So Partimento was not strictly vertical harmony. No. It was just beautiful and always flourishing imitation. Absolutely fun and absolutely with patterns and with a very deep sense of narrative, I would say. They were really telling tales in a certain way. And what Bob has been telling us about, this schemata, I read it at the Greek way, is so important because there were these patterns which were really so deep in their blood system, I would say.
Well, Rosa, I think that this is the problem about what happened in Partimento teaching in Italy, or in Naples, and generally in Italy. The funny part was completely lost. I mean, the fluency, melodic fluency, the improvisation, diminution, instrumental, instrumental writing or playing, and it became just a very dry and boring 4-voice block chord exercise. So in the end, we don't have to say that late 19th century Partimento was the same Partimento in the 18th century, but it changed completely, and because it became a written exercise with 4 voices, chords, and so it changed completely. The few surviving sources of 18th century Partimento tells us a completely different story. I think, for example, the two Durante, the Follia, and the other one in Grottaferrata. Maybe Peter can tell something about this, because I think that you are publishing a collection of Monument of Partimento Realization, I think it's called. Isn't it, Peter?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, if I may add something to this, we just previously talked about the situation in Germany and how improvisation died. I think this is very much related to it, because when you see the history of counterpoint pedagogy, you see that the music education was democratized. More and more people were getting access to the teaching, but that meant also that the classes were growing. In Leipzig, we had classes of 25 students at one time. You can't do any a practical counterpoint anymore. It dies
Yes.
from the very situation that you are in a class with lots of other people. In Naples, it was one to one, or maybe two or three, but there were very small groups, and you could learn counterpoint by playing. The subject was not called counterpoint, but it was called contrappunto pratico. It was practical counterpoint. Per I principianti di contrappunto, for the beginners in counterpoint, you started with the counterpoint on the keyboard. And that was exactly the aspect that was, okay, you could say it died, but it was also democratized. There is also a positive aspect. But unfortunately, the quality of the teaching wasn't as good anymore after 50,
No.
17, 18 years later.
Okay, so we should turn a little. There's one other thing that just completely astonished me about this tradition was that the singing. There's so much singing involved in this pedagogy. Now, most piano students be, oh no, I have to sing, but this is part of it. It was part of. In fact, wasn't there a rule that you were not even allowed to touch an instrument if you couldn't sing for a particular number of years or fulfill the requirements of singing at one of these Naples conservatories?
Well, yes, actually, the question is that the composers had to fix the accompaniment for singing. So they had to learn all together how to sing, how to put a sensible bass under the singing, and how to fill all the voices in between. Singing, you should just fix. Maybe Nick Barakwanas could be another guest about this subject, of course, as you know. But the question is that they all had to learn it all together because it was a single experience. And just to add something to what you were saying before, of course, at the beginning of the 19th century, we find always more written realizations for two reasons. First, because they get further from the original. The original was just transmitted orally. And there were so many things that were not to be written because everybody knew about them. So this is this, plateau of non-tellable, we could say, things which everybody should know. So everybody would just learn orally from a teacher. Of course, after 50 years, we have a huge gap, an enormous gap, and we start to lose this focus, and we have to reconstruct, and they had to go backwards to the original, or to a pseudo-original form. That's how it all ended to be more strict, more rigid in a certain way.
Does anybody want to add more on the aspect of singing, the importance of singing in the tradition?
Well, I would just add that Haydn was a boy soprano and barely escaped becoming a castrato. And so tended to come, at least in Catholic countries, but also in the Protestant North, they tended to come out of choir schools. In France, the maîtrise, for example. So a French opera composer like Boieldieu, who's not so well known today, but was important in the time of Napoleon, when he had a cold, he couldn't compose. If he couldn't sing, he couldn't compose. So I think it was Cimarosa, for example, had advanced singing lessons. I think it was just central to the concept of what it meant to be a composer. And if you think about it in the long sense of history, the composers that can write a great melody were the winners. I mean, Rachmaninoff and Mettner have a very similar skill set, but Mettner can't write a great tune. Solfeggio was music theory for a long period. And so at the Paris Conservatory, to take solfège meant to learn how to read music. And so the voice was a way to allow the teacher to understand what was inside the child's mind. Because in these conservatories with the very young children, it's not clear that they could read their own language yet. They weren't fully literate. And so the idea of a Guidonian hand, the touching places and singing that note, that makes perfect sense for non-literate students. There has to be a way to make tones physical or have names, and in some sense that was the real purpose of solfège.
Mm, mm, mm. Okay, now we should actually now talk about Partimento itself, the pedagogy. Really, people are wondering. Maybe we should just give a definition of it for people who are. We've really hyped it up now. We have to explain what it is. So Partimento, what was it, and how was it used in the pedagogy at the Naples conservatories? Maybe very briefly, we could just give an introduction to Partimento for what it is as a definition.
Oh, well, the word Partimento was used in southern Italy, in the Kingdom of Naples, to designate a bass, and more specifically, a sort of bass. At a certain point, it was used to indicate what we mean today as Partimento. So a single staff line, usually in the bass clef, but not always, moving frequently with higher clefs, and used for improvising a piece at the keyboard, and mainly for didactical purposes. This is what we mean by Partimento today. But in the Kingdom of Naples, the word Partimento was used as a synonym of basso or basso continuo. And in other regions of Italy, for example, in Bologna, or in northern Italy, in Venice, they had Partimenti, but the name was totally different. They used to call them bassi or bassetti, or with different names, but Partimento was only used in the Kingdom of Naples. What do you think about that, Rosa? Do you agree?
Well, as a matter of fact, yeah, basically yes. But for instance, bassetti was also used by some Durante pupils. For example, I'm thinking of this Franciscan Aimone, for instance. So we know that maybe bassetti was already also Neapolitan, because of course it was the bass line. So, but in many cases, I'm just thinking, I was looking for the definition in Lichtenthal. I don't remember in which volume of the Dizionario and Bibliografia della Musica in 1827, Fontana. And it was ascertained that it was, of course, the best line, and with some improvisation on it. I was just trying to look for that. So if I just find it, I will just come back with this by reading that. But yes, as a matter of fact, it was... we may find even, maybe also in Venice, I suppose. So Partimento è la parte, that is la parte bassa. In some cases, we know, for instance, that partimenti were the bass parts which were cavate, were just taken outside the sacred compositions. So in order to make pupils practice and make exercises, they would just start from even sacred compositions and then just copy only the best line in order to see how it could just grow and flourish on that.
I think that Fago same, and they also used the bass line from Corelli, a trio sonata, or Corelli opus 5 violin sonata for and Verdi did the same. When Verdi taught his only composition pupil, Muzio, was
if I might add,
Muzio was financed by Barezzi, and he wrote a series of letters to Barezzi, and we know from this letter what exactly Verdi taught to Muzio. And at a certain point, it describes exactly the course of teaching he did with Verdi. And it was a very Neapolitan, very traditional Neapolitan syllabus with counterpoint, partimenti, and he mentioned also imitazioni sui bassi di Corelli. So imitation on Corelli basses. And we don't know more about this. I try to locate the sources because Mozart says, I will never part with my beloved teacher correction on my exercises. So he didn't throw in the garbage bin, this for sure. But we don't know where they finished. I tried to locate in Busseto, in the Biblioteca del Monte dei Pegni in Busseto, but I couldn't locate them. So we don't know exactly what Mozart did with Verdi, but probably he used Corelli basses as partimenti, and he tried to create imitation using fragments or segments of thematic segments of Corelli.
Professor Ventura, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I wanted to add that the earliest mention of the word partimento in this connection with bass line that could be used for in keyboard situations is actually a set of part books from I think it's 1606, printed in Venice, where there is one part book that is called Partimento per l'organo. Okay, so the part book for the organist. So I think the origin of the word partimento comes from part book. You have also you see it in Veneziano in the late 17th century, Partimento per la guida. So the part book for the one who is directing the piece, which was the score, Partimento per la guida. So I think the meaning of the word maybe originally you may correct me if I'm wrong, but that's been my impression of the origin of the word. What do you think, Rosa?
I do agree, absolutely. I remember also in some cases, even some counterpoint texts, we can find, for instance, Scorpione in his books, in his parts of, this, maybe it was a Motetti edition. Yeah, Partimento is the bass part, exactly. Yeah.
Now, and there's also
Adriano
Banchieri explains this in more depth because, Adriano Banchieri was a monk and an organist about one century earlier than the rise of Partimento in Naples. And he writes that for an organist, it's much more convenient to accompany a choir using the bass line with some figure rather than reading the score. And this is more understandable because they had very frequently not the parts in the score, but parts written in separate booklets. So you can imagine an organist putting in front of him on before the organ 4 different booklets and trying to accompany doing this with this is crazy, So he invented this very convenient thing that you have the bass, you improvise on the bass, and above the bass there's some signs that gives you a hint about what you're doing.
Now, I wanted to ask a question that perhaps we talked about the Germans saying that this might have been unscientific. Do they have a point, though? Because perhaps in the 19th century, music had gone in a different direction. This is all 18th century stuff. So can Partimento catch up, so to speak, to the 19th century in terms of the new sounds that came about in the 19th century?
I think that it happens in Paris, and Bob can answer to you.
Yeah, it's, how should I put it? Well, musicians shouldn't take this wrong, but let me just say that they're highly gullible, okay, to pseudoscience. In a true science world, you dream of overturning the most favored theorem of your master. I mean, the way to become famous in science is to disprove something that everybody believes.
Mm-hmm.
That is how you become a famous scientist. That's Einstein, right? In music, you never believe that. If you're a student of Horowitz, you don't dream of making Horowitz look bad. If you're a student of Heifetz, you don't dream of growing up and criticizing the way he plays. You're an acolyte. You want to praise your teacher. You want to be like your teacher. And so if your teacher comes up with some crazy idea about harmony being a natural physical thing, think of Rameau or somebody like that, or Riemann, these are amateur scientists playing at science, and they're trying to describe the human brain, which is so complicated beyond anything they could ever imagine. And so they come up with these funny little theories, and the musicians line up behind them and they go with it. But I can tell you, as somebody who spent the first half of his career in the music cognition world, it's as bogus as a $3 bill. There's no basis for it. Okay, it's just imagination, and it's sad in a way. But musicians are very gullible about this thing, and it's not easy to disprove fantasy. Because fantasy is based on belief. And if musicians believe that a flat 7 in the scale is because of the seventh overtone or something like that, you cannot change their mind. They believe it, and they'll believe it until the last breath that they draw. So, the science of harmony was just a sham, but it served an important social purpose. In the German university, as Giorgio was saying, it's hard to set Fenaroli on the other side of the hallway when Hegel is teaching. You want something that has theorems, and you want to disprove things, and you want to be able to mark a paper. You want to be able to check off something and say, no, this is not the third inversion of the 3 chord. Even though that's a crazy concept, it's tremendously helpful in a classroom setting.
Oh, now can I just quickly jump in, Professor Gjerdingen? Now, many students of theory are going to be confused. Now, are you saying that let's separate these things? There's the science of harmony, there's chord inversions, there's Roman numeral analysis. Can you just parse that separately so that music theory students will say, wait, what is this professor saying that it's all junk, or is some stuff good? Is some stuff okay? Maybe you could just go a bit more granular.
Well, this is a complicated thing because it's something that people have been doing in universities for 150 years. And so it creates its own reality, but it's not very real in respect to actual music. All right. If you think of the rule of the octave as one of the things that almost any Partimento player would learn in the first few weeks, then you're talking about something that PhD candidates in music theory don't know today. I mean, we're talking about something that has gotten so far out of whack, that André Gidalge, was one of the greatest counterpoint teachers in the history of music. I mean, his volume on the fugue is really a book of tremendous mastery. Unfortunately, you can't understand it unless you're nearly at his level. Okay. But at the beginning of this book, André Gidalge says that, he tells you what harmony is about in the European tradition, and that is every stable chord is 1-3-5 or 1-3-6. And everything else is a dissonance or something that has to move toward a stable chord.
Oh.
It is a profound piece of knowledge. It's true for Palestrina, and it's true for the fugue exams at the Paris Conservatory in 1899 and in 1905. I mean, we have lost sight of the art of harmony because of the requirements of being in universities and teaching university students. So, I mean, after 2 years of harmony in an elite American institution, you could not make harmony at a professional level anywhere. That's a terrible indictment. You know? I mean, if you can make harmony, it's because you learned it someplace else. Right. So, I think we just have to give up and start over. And I shouldn't say that musicians are alone in this. This is true also for any of the arts in a university. Teaching dance or painting or writing, anything like that. These are really artisanal worlds of knowledge where you're dealing with a material and how to shape the material and how to tell stories. And the university system is not well designed to teach it or to reward it. Okay.
Well, unfortunately, many musicians in Italy believe that they have to move into the university system, and this is a belief that lasted for almost 1 century now. I mean, the first articles on the Università della Musica, music university, I know they are from almost 1 century ago. And because musicians feel that being considered a trade school or artisanal skills, they are less important than university professor and university students. So they really move to upgrade. They want to upgrade to the university system. And this is something that is already happening in Italy, for example, the conservatory. And there are people complaining about this because they are increasing the cultural exams, and at the detriment of practical skills in instrumental, for example, instruments or in harmony. But still, I think that the problem was when you try to teach something concerning music technique in the university, and this is the problem I faced in the last 20 years of my life, trying to teach counterpoint or harmony or continuo in university with student that they have no musical background at all, and they know nothing about music, and they just sit in the class for 2 hours, 2 times a week, and for 1 semester. And at the end, they are supposed to write a good 3-voice counterpoint in the 5 species of fugues, and the result is usually hopeful. I mean, I did the exams 2 days ago, and I was appalled by the lack of any conceivable skill about in music. But it's not their fault. Absolutely, it is not their fault. It's the system that is not working.
Well, can I jump in and talk about the fact that I remember in an interview with Professor Job Eiserman, he said that world-class concert musicians, never mind the students, world-class concert artists would say in their master classes, "Oh, I don't know anything about harmony. I don't know anything about theory." They just become great players. And is that perhaps what is students are moving off in this direction? They don't see the need for the creative aspect of or the understanding of music because they're all becoming performers, so to speak.
This is a different. I remember when Bob invited me to give a class on Fenaroli in Evanston. Perhaps you remember too, Bob. There was a student, a girl, who was a fantastic pianist. You told me, a girl who the evening before she was playing some of the big romantic piano concerto like the Rach 3 or Prokofiev 3, and I asked her to play on the piano Fenaroli, the first Partimento Fenaroli from Book 1, the easiest one, and I realized that her hands were shaking with fear. I mean, a girl who the night before played Rach 3, how could be afraid of playing such an easy thing
I
like
don't
a Fenaroli
understand.
1-1?
I
That's
just don't.
crazy.
I mean, that is just Professor Gjerdingen. I want you to answer, talk, see if you remember that anecdote. But for most people, when they see a great musician play, they just assume that everything's in the bag. Like, okay, this guy can compose just like Mozart. They're playing great. But the reality is that's not quite the same. As they're great players, but they don't have quite the same skill sets as an 18th century musician or 19th century and earlier.
There are a few concert artists who can improvise well, and it's very impressive. But usually that's a skill they develop on their own because it's not taught. Vladimir Horowitz could improvise beautifully.
Mm.
Chifra could improvise beautifully,
Yes.
and as a real virtuoso. When Josef Hoffman, the great early 20th century pianist, when he moved from piece to piece during a recital, he would prelude and modulate to the new key before he started the new piece. I thought that was a very strange effect, but for him, it made a big difference to get the audience in the right key before he started. So it's a skill
Absolutely.
it's a skill that has atrophied and gone away. And it's you're right. I mean, very high level classical musicians are almost terrified to improvise because they will be so much worse than anybody can imagine, and that's embarrassing. I mean, they've worked very hard to get to where they are, and then to have to become just a child at the keyboard again, it's a terrible thing. But when you start with children, it's quite easy. Okay, children have no trouble improvising at the keyboard. They've got nothing to lose. Okay, I mean, I was in charge of a sort of professional advancement group at an annual convention of music theorists, and I was dealing with an elite set of PhD students, and I gave them. I said, "This is the world's simplest partimento." I gave them do re mi in the key of C major, so they had 3 notes, and I said, "Give me a second part above it that an 18th century musician would have used." And out of 11 people, 1 gave an acceptable answer, and she was Italian. Okay.
She was?
Yeah, she was Italian.
Oh. Well,
I think she was even a Napolitana.
It's never too late to begin improvising.
The other answers were completely unacceptable. It is really amazing, because how should I put it? These people all play Mozart and Haydn and Bach. How could they not know what an 18th century musician would do? But they didn't.
No,
so that's why we're here.
Yeah, we talked about the past. We talked about the beginning of Partimento research. We talked a little bit now about the present state, in a way, the current state. Now I want to end off this panel about the future, and very exciting things have happened. I know that, for instance, there was a music schema conference coming that just passed last year. Many people are publishing books. Professor John Mortensen has come up with 2 beautiful books. It's looking very bright, isn't it? And who maybe Professor Ventura, do you want to just talk about the future of Partimento in music education?
Yeah, well, I think the past 10 years or so have really shown where this is going. It's growing continuously, and the literature is growing, and more books are appearing, and people are starting to use this in conservatories and in universities. Um, of course, some older ideas about harmony and counterpoint are being challenged, and there are many discussions about that, of course. But I think it will be very interesting to see the developments in the next 10 or 15 years. I think this will grow continuously.
Wonderful. How about Professor Rosa? Would you like to join in and mention what you think on the future of music education as it relates to Partimento and this new revival of 18th century historic practices?
Well, as a matter of fact, I don't have the luck of practicing it because, I just teach a general history of music, and I'm not in touch with students at my university who can really go further. As a matter of fact, I suppose, the epigonous route, as you say in the American English, is going far, far beyond what we meant when it all started. So I really can't predict how it's going on, but I really hope it just I just invite everybody to focus on sources as much as possible and on reliable and true versions of what it can be. It's always the same problem, the further you go from the original, let's quote original, the more difficult it may become to find a new path. So it depends on what new performers are looking for, to be loyal and truthful to the past, to the origins, or to go far, far beyond. I think there are so many insights that are going to be taken. For instance, source material, the history of collections, how all these sources were really spread all over the world, and why, and were they just kept for being used, or were just kept, by very rich collectors and never ever opened again. There's so much to be done. So I really don't know. It's quite a big, big, big question mark.
Professor Gjerdingen, would you like to also talk about what you see as the future in music education?
Well, just a footnote from the past, inspired by what Rosa just said. Uh, a student of Feo, who was in the generation of Leo in Naples, a student of his went to Spain and then went to Mexico City in New Spain, and he became the maestro di capella at the cathedral in Mexico City. And his daughter, Micaela, um, became the head of a music conservatory for women, for young ladies in 18th century Mexico City. And they taught Feo, and his name was Jerusalem. They taught Feo and Jerusalem solfeggi in Mexico City. I mean, Cipolli, who was an Italian musician, ended up in a Jesuit mission in Argentina. The students of people like Davide Perez in Portugal ended up all over Brazil. So a really amazing spread of Partimento culture all over the New World. Now, I would like to imagine a really sunny future for Partimento study, but it may become very much, it may remain a kind of counterculture, okay? Because as I said, there are social and institutional requirements that the current system fits very well in a university. It is expensive to give private lessons to people in harmony and counterpoint. It's not easy at all. Things that are obvious to insiders can take a very long time to disperse among a broader set of people. And I hope we're not on that kind of time scale, but it may be some time before universities and colleges are willing to explore fundamentally different way of teaching classical music. You know, that in the few places where there's a little bit of teaching of schemas and partimenti, it tends to be an add-on to the traditional curriculum. But I think the world has changed so much that somebody should dive in and just go all out and say, we're going to teach classical music in a classical way. And if you want to study jazz, learn it in a jazz way. And if you want to study uh, American rural country music, learn it that way. In other words, maybe there isn't any universal curriculum that is appropriate in music. That this was a belief for many, many years, that there's a core curriculum that's suitable for any type of music and any type of musician. It's possible that that is not true.
Mm. Very, very insightful. Professor Sanguinetti, would you like to add on to that?
Well, we are obviously, we are insiders, as Bob said. So we look around us and we see that Partimento is spreading and is gaining momentum constantly. But if you compare our small Partimento world, with the global way music is taught, that probably I think that Bob has a point. But nevertheless, I think that this is part of a larger issue concerning the industry of classical music. I think that the industry of classical music is changing, and because it has to change. That cannot be like it used to be 50 years ago. For instance, the profession of pianist, I see how classical pianists, they strive to gain attention today. And this is a totally different way that they used to be 40 years ago. In a way, I think that pianists like Maurizio Pollini, Pollini probably is the last specimen of his pieces. There will no more this kind of pianist is not possible anymore. So that the pianist totally in the Kunstwerk belief, and so it's something it has to be changed, and we still don't know where the classical music industry is going, but I think that if classical music will change, Partimento will be a part of the change. So it will bring Partimento and the schemata and what I used to call the new theory with it, because it's integral part of this probably new culture of classical music, and with improvisation, of course. And by the way, I wanted to tell you that my university has won a kind of national endowment, Italian national endowment, with a project on improvisation, and we'll be keeping a seminar, a workshop on classical improvisation on the piano in Perugia from 13 to 15 April, next April, with John Mortensen, Costantino Mastro Primiano, and myself. So we'll teach improvisation with John, and the role of improvisation in the music of Mozart and early Beethoven with Costantino on the fortepiano, and I will teach Partimento. So, and this is and we had an enthusiastic reaction. I mean, we opened the application form 5 days ago. We have already 20 applications.
Wow.
Yes, it's amazing. So I I'm really hopeful that something is going to change, and quite fast, I hope.
Fantastic.
Well, I have to say, I can only speak for myself, and the four of you changed my life. The work that the four of you and the people in the wider community have done are changing lives, and especially giving us a different view. And for me, if just people are aware that this exists, I would be happy. Just be aware that this option for music, this other path exists, it would be a beautiful thing. And so I just want to thank everyone for being on the panel. And again, from my heart, thank you for the work that you've done. You've changed my life. And I'm sure people who watch this are some of the insiders as well. And you've changed their lives as well. And maybe I just want to add one more question. And you can just all jump in. Did you picture that anyone would be interested in this 20 years ago?
No.
Absolutely not.
No.
I remember giving a lecture on this kind of thing at a national convention, and a senior scholar came up to me afterwards and said, "Well, Bob, this is very interesting, but it's not really music, is it?"
Well, I can tell you that my first paper on Partimento was in Los Angeles at the SMT conference. I think it was 2006, and they put me the last session on Sunday. So when everybody is hurrying out to the airport to catch the plane, was the bags, and they didn't know what it was, and
No.
so yeah, I couldn't imagine anything like that.
I got it,
No,
Professor Ventura. Oh, go ahead, Professor.
Well, I'm
Gjerdingen.
just a former president of the American Musicological Society once came up to me at a convention and said, "What the hell is a printer?"
Wow. Is that verbatim?
Yes.
Well, Professor Ventura, you said you. How about you? I mean, I just have to get your take on this. I mean, did you think when you were looking at archival material that anyone would be interested in this over 10 years later?
Well, I started a little bit later than the others of you. So I think 20 years ago, I didn't know what the word Partimento was, actually. I had no idea. So to me, this came along maybe, let's see, 12 or 13 years ago.
Yeah, well, and finally, we must end off with Rosa. Rosa, I mean, you're a very pioneer scholar.
Yeah, here we are.
That's it.
Look, yes.
Yeah. In the meantime, I'm just no. Yeah.
A little bit up.
There it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Yeah,
That's
there it is. So I managed to find it.
Wow.
Yeah, what are your thoughts? 20 from when you wrote those articles till now? Would anybody be interested? Like, would a man from Singapore call you in the middle of
Not in the least.
asking you questions about Partimento history and your research? I mean, what's the world coming to?
Absolutely not. No, absolutely not. But it's fun. Even this is fun. You never know how your interest may just go further.
Yeah. Well, thank
Even
you so
much.
Thank you so much to everyone. And please, let's come back again soon.
you.
I'm sure there's lots of topics that we haven't covered. We have to do. This was a lot of fun. And thank you all again. And have a wonderful 2023. Happy New Year to everyone. And we will talk about more Partimento. There will be lots of Partimento this year. Don't worry. There's going to be plenty more. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Nikhil.
Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Thank you, really. Bye. Bye all.
Bye-bye.